everyone. This is your host, Cherry from Claribase. I am so excited to have Patton with us today. We are going to dive into a lot of topics around leadership. Just as an introduction, I'm Cherry. I'm your host. I'm the founder of Claribase. We help our clients with all sorts of urgent and important data issues. So we help people really clarify their data. But as we've been working with all of these nonprofits throughout the last 6 years, we've really seen a lot of nonprofit leaders wanting to advance in lots of different areas of their organization. And that's why we started this podcast, Nonprofit 2.0. And I would love for you to introduce yourself, Patton, and tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Sherry, thank you. I serve as the Senior Director for Leadership Initiatives for a firm called Armstrong McGuire. We're based in the Carolinas, Southeast United States, but work with organizations across the country. I started in my career many years ago as an intern. So I'd like to lift that up because I hope nonprofit organizations and their leaders will consider the power of internships because I'm frankly grateful that an opportunity arose for me with Special Olympics International. So as a college student, I worked in DC and had a chance to learn directly from a global organization like Special Olympics and saw the career opportunities that were available. And so from there, I ended up spending 10 years with Special Olympics. I spent another 10 years as a fundraiser for two universities, leading their university advancement efforts, is the term higher ed folks use. And then for the last 17 years, I've been consulting, working with nonprofit leaders across primarily the Southeast. And along the way, wrote a book about nonprofit leadership, started a podcast thanks to a partnership with my daughter. And I continue to work through Armstrong McGuire with organizations, but especially focused on leadership development, strategy, and fundraising. So delighted to share more about that with you and your audience.
And how do you approach your work when it comes to building the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, I think there's three distinct generations that I focus on. The first is the emerging leader generation. There is an incredibly talented younger professional that just about every university you or I could think of has programming around nonprofit management, philanthropic studies, some such topical area. And they want to impact our sector. So I have worked in a number of programs helping leaders like that get acclimated to the sector. How do they first get the job? And then how do they succeed once they get there? So I lead a program called the Emerging Leaders in Philanthropy. It's a virtual program that we do every year, bringing together these talented emerging leaders in the sector, helping them navigate the content and experience and skills they need. I think there are also two other generations that continue to need our support. There is the mid-career professional, those that have been in the sector. You, I know, work with many of them. They like it, they've been around, but they are trying to advance into executive leadership. And so I'm involved in some leadership development programs for them. And then, of course, the executive leaders themselves, many of whom I think exist in a sometimes lonely world. You know, when you reach the top of your organization, you still want a community. And so that's something else I'm trying to build.
I can definitely be lonely at the top of any organization. I always see people posting on Reddit and other forums saying, hey, I don't have a good place to share my grievances because
Exactly.
I can't tell my board, I can't tell my management.
Right. Exactly right. The board's your boss, and you want to present a confident front to those that report to you. So where do you go? And so I've tried to provide, we have a couple of mastermind programs bringing together senior leaders like that in a safe space because, like you said, Cherry, I think they don't often have that.
Yeah. All for mastermind groups.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. And does your approach differ when you're working with the different generations of leaders?
To some extent. I mean, obviously, those that have more experience, we can talk more in what I would call a case study environment. You know, they have actual situations, experiences that they can bring to the conversation. But I still think some of the fundamentals remain the same. And I found leaders at all levels. And you and I were talking before we start recording that I think there are four kind of keys to leadership development that can apply to each of these generations. The younger generation may not have the same experiences, but they've got great experience still. And so, how do we build on that and sharpen those skills they have and then continue to do so through each of the progressing generations?
And what are those 4 areas? I'm certainly very curious to find out.
I teased you with them. I'll give you the headlines and then we can expand as much as you'd like. Number
Yeah.
one is sharpening your focus. I think many in our sector struggle with the volume of activity. And as you know, many nonprofit organizations are not adequately funded, they're not adequately staffed. So you find there is an overload. And so we can talk about ways to kind of mitigate the volume of activity that affects many leaders. The second challenge that I try to address is mindset. I think a lot of nonprofit leaders, very talented in a certain area, but maybe don't feel like they have all of the leadership skills to succeed. For example, they came up in the program side and were very good at that, and but they want to become an executive leader. They might need more management, financial strategy, and those types of skills. And but sadly, they may decide, like, well, I'm just not a finance person. So I guess I can't do that. And so the mindset coaching I try to provide is no, yes, you can. Let's look at ways you can address that. The third one is the opportunity to amplify your voice. Wherever you are in your organization, whether it's junior or senior, often there is the challenge I hear from nonprofit leaders like, my board doesn't really understand what I'm doing. My boss doesn't understand what I'm doing. The community doesn't understand what I'm doing. So I think there are ways, and what I use the phrase, how do we amplify your voice internally and externally so that you can succeed? And then finally, the one you touched on perfectly, the challenge of isolation. And so the fourth of my suggested steps to build leadership is to create community locally, regionally, nationally, and given the technology we all have access to. But let's avoid isolation by building community in ways like what you said, create a mastermind. And that's literally what I did 5 years ago when I kept hearing the concern of isolation. I'm like, all right, let's do something about it. And so those are the four areas that I spend a lot of my time working with nonprofit leaders.
Nice. And that focus piece, just coming back to the beginning, is such a big one because everyone is just burning the midnight fuel and feeling burnt out.
Yes.
There's not enough funding, there's not enough people staffed up on the team to do everything that's needed and wanted by the organization. So when you talk to people about bringing more focus, like how do you start that conversation? Are there activities that you try to get them to do that are tactical and help them to focus better?
Yeah, absolutely. And number one, it starts with an exercise I call the vision framework. Being very clear personally about where you want to go with your nonprofit leadership. Because you're right, it's easy to get buried in the daily tactical activity. And so I kind of walk a leader through, all right, let's talk about the work you're doing. What does it look like if you continue to advance? Do you want to stay in this sector? Because again, many of the experiences nonprofit leaders have are transferable. They could be in healthcare philanthropy, but maybe they want to move into arts and culture or education. And so we have some conversation about what those kind of options might look like. Would they move? The young professional might say, yeah, I'd be happy to move for the right opportunity. So, if so, let's talk about where you'd move and what that looks like. Others, however, might say, I'm committed to this community. I have family here or whatever. But all of this is part of a larger discussion around getting some clarity around where you're going, which in turn sharpens the focus of, if I know now what I want to do in the next 1, 3, and 5 years, I think it helps you declutter. And we literally in our mastermind program have an exercise about what can you declutter in your life to reduce the volume. We all have too many apps on our phone. We all have too many emails in our inbox. We all have so much coming at us. And so we need to be more intentional about how do we prioritize some of this activity coming at us. So working through
Yeah.
those. But yeah, have you found any luck at some of these decluttering activities?
I mean, I can definitely relate to that inbox issue, but for me, I think it's really about booking time off on my calendar where I only focus on that strategy work. And I'm not perfect at it. If I have a lot of work travel for a certain period, that totally falls off the rails. But my Thursday afternoons are often actually protected just for my strategy work within the organization because otherwise I have so many day-to-day things that I need to get to that are urgent and important as well.
So I'm such a fan of that. The author Cal Newport, you may be familiar with, has a book called Deep Work and talks about the dangers in this digital world of distraction. And if we don't proactively manage our calendar will manage us. And so
Mhm.
I love your Thursday routine, for example. And I encourage leaders I work with to get ahead of your calendar, carve out that strategy time like you described, wherever it is on your calendar. Be more intentional about tightening some of the meetings that take too much time. If we allow our calendar to default to the 1 hour duration, every meeting doesn't need 60 minutes. And so, could we find more strategy time if we simply were a bit more focused on the meetings we have? It's called Parkinson's law, right? If we have a 60-minute meeting, we'll end up spending 60 minutes, but we probably could have done it in 30. So what can
Mhm.
we do as leaders to proactively set boundaries on our calendar that, again, for that overwhelmed nonprofit leader, maybe they start tightening existing meetings, thus allowing them more time to get the strategy or deep work done?
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking about that vision piece, it also brought up something in my mind of through the different generations, their vision for their personal goal over the next 5 years might be actually quite different. So,
Very
for
true.
someone who's just younger, they might be very open to switching into a different organization. Whereas if you're the executive director of your organization, your personal and maybe organizational vision might be a little bit more intertwined in that 5 years from now, you hope to be still in the same place or you have a 5 year vision for that. Whereas for someone younger in their career, I imagine the timeline could be a little shorter.
You make a great point. And I'm also trying to address it's unfair to ask somebody, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Right?
Yeah,
Because that
I certainly didn't
we
know.
don't know, right? And what I do with the vision framework, there's 7 questions. And I say, look, some of them you may not have the answer for, and that's fine. Let's answer the questions you can answer. And then we'll build a plan around those that remain. And we talk about, maybe I have clarity in the next 1 to 3 years,
Mhm.
but let's be open to the fact that 3 years from now, I might wanna do something totally different
Yeah.
and not be kinda stuck. But I think a lot of people are stressed over that kind of, "I don't know what I'm gonna do," and I hope maybe you and I can offer them some relief and say, "That's okay. Let's continue to build your skills and experience so that you're in a position to do whatever opportunities emerge 3 years from now." And so that's
Mhm.
where the second area I described to you, the building your mindset, is also building your skill set, because I hate for you to get to a point 3 years from now where a new opportunity emerges, but you're not ready.
Mhm.
And the example, Cherry, would be like if when I was in Special Olympics, I was a program person
Yeah.
and felt like I got pretty good, but I didn't understand the finances. And I knew if I wanted to advance in a business sense, I needed to learn that stuff. So fortunately,
Yeah, because when you talk about growing through the program side, you're very much doing the execution work, measuring the impact, but at a more strategic level, it involves a lot more different skills. The program side is one department of a nonprofit.
exactly right. And sometimes, and I was guilty of this myself, I just thought if I put my head down and I'll be really good at what I do. Now, yeah, if all I wanted to do was program, I would have been fine. But fortunately, a mentor of mine said, you know what, you need to step back and broaden your skill set, because someday you
Yes.
might want to move into more senior leadership and you are going to have to understand the budget. You are going to have to understand governance of board dynamics. And so that's again back to what I suggest for that younger professional. Let's build your skills so that you have more opportunities when the time comes.
Right. And within our organization, how do you recommend people to build that skill set beyond the program that they're in or beyond the current role that they're in?
Within the organization itself, yeah,
Yeah.
I strategically network within the organization itself. For example, what helped me at Special Olympics was I sat down with the chief financial officer and she was wonderful. I said, "Hey, I'd like to advance my skills. Would you be willing to meet with me for a couple times over coffee and help me build a curriculum, if you will, so that I can have a basic understanding of the finances of this organization. Of course, that helped me understand finances more broadly in the nonprofit space. And I just said, all right, let's do 3 meetings. The first of which helped me understand all of the expenses. Let's talk the expense side of the organization. What are the key drivers of what this organization needs investment for? And then second meeting, let's talk about where all the revenue comes from. What do I need to look for? Help me understand the different reports and so forth. And then finally, I just said, let's have a meeting to understand all the dynamics, the different filing requirements and other measures. But to answer your question, the point is I kind of built a curriculum, if you will, even within the organization, just by utilizing the talent of colleagues that were already there.
I love that. And I don't ever want to go to a senior leader and say, hey, can you just teach me your work? That's not
Right. You got to
necessarily
be careful.
great
Right.
approach, but the way you've laid it out makes a lot of sense. Maybe it's not the most senior person in the organization, but another lateral team member from another team that could help do some knowledge sharing. And maybe you could teach that person about the program side, because
Exactly
if
right.
a person from finance, your colleague from finance wants to broaden their skill set, they need to understand also what's happening in programs, because that's such a core piece of the organization.
Two-way street. You're exactly right. And notice by defining it as like 3 meetings over coffee, because you're right. I think my colleague, if I just showed up and said, teach me everything you know, they would have said, look, I don't have time for that. But when
Yeah,
I
exactly.
had a general idea and said, look, 45 minutes 3 times, and I'll sponsor the coffee, and here are my basic questions, then she was able to say, okay, that makes sense and is not, adding too much to her plate. But I love your idea too of maybe there are things I could help her with. And then she feels like it is a two-way street.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of different aspects of organizations throughout our work. When I think about the program and financial side, sometimes I actually think about them as being much more intertwined than just two different departments,
Good
because
point.
we've built some databases before where we needed to understand the grant funding, where it was going to, and make sure that some grants are restricted, so they have to be sponsoring a certain program and a certain initiative. So that's I
Good
actually see a
example.
lot of the connection points between finance and programming. So there's always just this interconnectivity that people don't tend to appreciate when everything is just in silos, in different folders, in different systems, and we tend to bring that all that together.
So well put. And again, external audiences, certainly funders are going to ask questions, not just of the programming, but how the financial model works to allow you to do the programming. And so having that kind of discussion you describe makes everyone more comfortable in those community conversations.
And it goes back to, what can we declutter on our calendar? Well, if you had good information to begin with, maybe that hour-long meeting doesn't need to take an hour and a half.
It was revolutionary for me, Cherry, because I defaulted to whatever calendar program I had. But I found that people, don't respond by complaining. Meetings tend to be more efficient. So when you send the meeting invitation to your colleague, don't send them 60 minutes, send them 30. You immediately signal that, hey, we're going to be efficient with our time. And so every time a meeting comes in, I try to set the time. And then it's amazing how now all of a sudden I've carved out 2 more hours for the strategy work.
Speaking of meetings, I'm sure lots of people are meeting with their boards, and you were talking about amplifying their messaging and their communication. So how do you help a leader develop that?
I think they need to focus on a couple of communication skills, the fundamentals. And I talk about writing, speaking, and presenting. As a leader, I think you need to be effective in all of those categories. And also the informal communication, the social networking, because a lot of nonprofit work and happens in the community at an event or in some other setting. I talk about utilizing the skills of basic communication. Writing handwritten notes, I think, is a lost art, and especially in a digital age where many of your constituents are used to the digital overload, a handwritten note goes a long way. I try to write 3 of them a week. Sharpens my ability to convey a message. Doesn't have to be long, but it also demonstrates to a donor or someone in the community that I really did this. This wasn't something that was generated and emailed to them in a blast. I also think a leader has to be effective in what I would call executive communication. Your board is not going to read a 9-page report. I had a board chair famously tell me, I was an English major undergrad, so I was very proud of this wonderful long essay I wrote and shared it with the board chair. And he just said, look, I'm not going to read that. If you can't tell me what this is in one page, I'm not going to read it. And it was a reminder that I think we as nonprofit leaders have to be very good at condensing often concepts that are complex, but we have to understand a volunteer board member is not going to take the full deep dive in that. So, executive communications is the other area that I think we need to work on. Personal communications, executive communications, and then building persuasive communications. In a noisy world of nonprofits, why is our nonprofit one that the community should pay attention to and fund? And so, can I write as a leader a persuasive post on LinkedIn, in my newsletter, in other social media channels? So, long story short, I think communication, you can break it down into at least those three categories and you can get better. And that I think helps get back to the original point of amplifying your voice.
Through the work that we do, I definitely have come to really appreciate communication as a department and as a function, as a skill on its own, because the amount of clarity, even when we talk to our clients, the amount of clarity we need and the precision we need when we're articulating what a system needs to do is just so important. And we work with a lot of communications teams at really large organizations, and their role and function in terms of bringing stability to the organization, communicating internally, and just with their customers is so key.
100%. And I bet you've seen it done well, and I bet you've seen it done poorly, right? And when it doesn't work, everything else can go bad in a hurry.
Exactly. The piece around that executive communication is interesting too, because again, coming back to that person who's come up through programs, they are used to talking to their clients or their community members. That is a very different type of communication to speaking with a colleague versus speaking with a board. And I run into this a lot where it's the classic thing where a CEO will say, "Well, print everything for me on one page. I don't even want to open my email or my phone screen is this big, so if it doesn't fit on my screen, I'm not looking at it." Yeah, don't even think about writing an essay to any of my
It's a good
exec.
discipline.
Yep.
It's a good discipline, isn't it? And that's something you can practice because I think a lot of times we're so comfortable in our programming area that we can expand forever. But if you had to produce one page to describe the program you're hoping to accomplish over the next 12 months, how would you say that? And that is something I think that all of us can do a better job of.
Yeah. How do you encourage people to improve their communication skills? Are there tactical things people can do?
Yeah, and you just named one of them. All three of the categories I mentioned, frankly, just practice setting a discipline that you're going to write a note and demonstrate a human touch to a key constituent in your organization. So not everybody likes to write handwritten notes. It's like our parents made us write thank you letters as a child, but maybe there was something to that. And so every leader out there has people that would appreciate somebody in the community that won an award or is dealing with hardship or needs an experience of gratitude. Maybe somebody in your team, celebrate an anniversary of some sort. So the point is practicing that personal touch note. The executive summary, you always can do a better job of practicing that, whether it's a memo to your boss, whether it's an executive summary to your board, but your ability to articulate what you do to others is huge. And then, of course, you can translate it into every newsletter that a nonprofit has. Whoever runs the newsletter, they're constantly looking for content, right? So I guarantee if you say, hey, I'd like to contribute an article to the next newsletter, and whatever it is, I bet they will say, absolutely, go for it. And then there's, again, more practice. Because when you get to the executive level, you are the chief communicator. And people that want to support you or are pondering funding you or wanting to work for you, they're going to go read your content. We all know we're going to your LinkedIn page and trying to get a sense of your voice. We're going to look up places where you've spoken or publications in which you've provided written content. So, again, sorry to go on and on about it, but practice all three categories, build your voice, amplify your voice, and then that will pay off even more down the road.
The piece that's really important as we go through this communication topic is also something you touched on earlier, is just being persuasive and being clear is also really important, because whether you're getting your board to say yes, or getting your donors to say yes, or getting your team to say yes, that conversation is happening for a reason. And we always have to frame the conversation for the person in terms of what's in it for them. And that was something I personally took away from my Toastmasters program.
Good. Good for you, first of all, for what a good example of a skill that, we can all work on. We can all be better public speakers through programs like that. When I worked at Special Olympics as an intern, the founder of the organization, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, was still there, actively leading a program she started in her backyard in the 60s. But she was famous for absolute clarity in communication and, frankly, being precise and compelling. She did not like communication that rambled. She would just simply interrupt it. And it taught me a lesson that if I can't articulate in a concise and compelling manner what I'm trying to say, she would shut it down. She would turn and get somebody else to respond. And so I always found that to be interesting, that people don't have a long attention span. And so we need to practice thinking and then speaking with a opening statement and then supporting facts and then a conclusion. Right, just like, how we're taught to write, we ought to speak like that too. Mrs. Shriver, this is why we should take Special Olympics to South America, and here are the 3 sports that would be effective there. And Mrs. Shriver, this will advance our program by tenfold in that continent.
Hmm.
Period. Done, right?
Yeah.
And I just like, all right, she's onto something, because most people would ramble for 20 more minutes and she wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've been going through this conversation, I think that community piece is also really key, because you might have focus when you're early on in this program. You might work on your mindset and think about that for 2 weeks, and then it just falls off the radar. So having that community to come back to, and having that mastermind group to come back to keep everyone involved accountable is great. How do you run your mastermind group?
Yeah, they are groups of 9 or 10. I run them 3 times a year. So we've had 26 cohorts now since we started. It's been a wonderful opportunity to bring together leaders from all over the country. There are 7 sessions, and some of the things you and I are talking about literally are the headline, the modules, if you will. The first session is vision framework. Let's talk about how you determine your vision and sharpening kind of that focus on things you know. And then we move to a second session that's self assessment. I have what I believe are the 12 essential skills and experiences for nonprofit leadership. And we talk about them and kind of create a safe space to self evaluate, not in a punitive way, because we all
Yeah,
need to work on things, right?
yeah, yeah.
But less.
Safety piece is so important.
No, you're exactly right, and that is essential throughout. But what I was also thinking is that the self-assessment is not just an opportunity to work on things you need to improve, but also, are you maximizing the strengths you already have? I find a lot of leaders have great talents that they're not maximizing. And so let's identify those and come up with a strategy to elevate them. If you
Mm.
are a good speaker, then let's get you in front of audiences in our community, you know? Now, if you need to work on, like I did, your financial acumen, then let's come up with a plan to connect you there. But the mastermind has been a wonderful way. But what I tell people, whether you do a formal mastermind or create your own, I suggest, Cherry, a lot of times to start with identify 2 comparable peers in your sector. Who are 2 people doing similar work to you at a different organization that you can build some sort of communication channel, a peer, right? Now, then secondarily, I would suggest you identify 2 aspirational peers. This is where you really can build community that helps elevate you. So, in other words, when I started at Special Olympics, I started asking around, who are the best program directors in the country? And it was an informal poll, but it quickly came to my attention that, oh yeah, you need to talk to Susan in Colorado and Mark in New Jersey. And I had, fortunately, the courage to reach out to aspirational peers like them, and they were wonderful. Like you said, though, I was respectful of their time. But in terms of back to the point here of building community, I knew if I could learn from the best in my field, it would help me get better.
Yeah, and I love the mastermind having different types and groups of people, perhaps in different roles as well, because it just builds more connectivity within the group in terms of what people can learn and bring and take away from this group.
100%. We've tried to very intentionally connect nonprofit leaders from different sectors, different geographies. We don't want, and most of them said, yeah, I have a group where I can go to that's purely in healthcare fundraising. That's what I do. But the mastermind intentionally doesn't just have 9 other people in healthcare philanthropy. So we've got an executive director of a human services organization in the same room with a chief finance officer from environmental organization. And like you said, that variety really adds value.
And there are common threads to every organization, to every team, to all the different challenges that people face as well. So not only are they taking away maybe learnings for a future problem they might run into, but also building that strategy, more strategic mindset of anticipating the issues down the road as they take on more responsibility within their organizations. Oh, I've seen this issue come up before from my mastermind group, and I can feel the inklings of this kind of scenario happening and get ahead of it instead of reacting to every single thing as if it's brand new and no one's ever experienced it before.
Such a good example. Something that the classic exercise in mastermind is called the hot seat, which, masterminds were started 80 years ago, at least the original concepts. But even then, each session, one person gets to be in the hot seat, which sounds more painful than it is. In fact, I think it's often the favorite exercise for participants where they get to lead a discussion about what they're dealing with and then get the collective wisdom of the group. And I prompt our mastermind when it's your turn. I'll say, Cherry, first of all, share something you're proud of because we all could benefit from your experience and you decide what you want to share. But then the second half of your time, share a challenge you're facing. And so you've got, again, a safe space to share. Hey, my boss is driving me crazy. My board's driving me crazy. And one of my employees is driving me crazy. Or I, I I think I'm ready to make a change. I love my work, but maybe this is the time. And so you're able to, again, back to your earlier point, instead of isolation, now I have a community that I can share a challenge with. And it's amazing what can be accomplished even in just 30 minutes in that setting when you have a group that's, ready to support you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing your 4 ways to help leaders improve and level up their own leadership skills. How can people find you?
LinkedIn, Patton McDowell is probably my most common channel. ArmstrongMcGuire.com is my firm's website. And there you can find out more about programs like the Mastermind. I'm also a podcaster. And so Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership is the title of my podcast and also my book. So some of the things you and I are talking about, I put into a book published a few years ago, also called Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership. So I would welcome any of your listeners to connect with me in any of those places.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, we'll share the link to the resources as well in all the communications that we have. And once again, thank you again, Patton, for sharing how you've approached leadership and coaching different generations of leaders. I've really appreciated this conversation and you sharing with your audience.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the great work you're doing in the nonprofit sector as well.
We're just turning messy spreadsheets into actual usable data and just bringing that clarity. Sometimes we save people time in the meetings that they have that just stretch for way too long, and other times we just get their sanity back.
We need that. Thank you for what you're doing.
Our pleasure. Okay, let's wrap up here. If you ever want to look for some help with your data, you can find us at claribase.com and have a great rest of your day.